today we're taking a look at the Hilleberg Akto. We'll do a full review as well as 5 tips on how you get the most out of your Akto. The Akto weighs 1.7 kilograms. It's a one-person tent and it's made for 4 seasons. It's been around for a very long time, and a few years back a newer version of it has been introduced. It's called the Enan, and it's essentially a 3-season version of the Akto. So the Akto is fairly compact. I've been able to pack it in here. This is a 22-liter backpack, and I have the tent on the outside. So I have the tent in here. This is a 13-liter dry bag. You can fold and compress the tent a little bit. However, you can't squeeze it more in this direction because there are fiberglass poles in here to support the tent corners, and we'll have a look at that a bit later. Next to that, there's the pole, aluminium pole, and the pegs which fit into this bag. Okay, so let's set it up. So I always like to start by assembling the poles. In this case, it's just one, so that's pretty quick. So this is the pole. These are the pegs. There are 10 pegs. And in here, there's a spare section that you can use for repairs. So the Akto is in Hilleberg's Red Label line of tents, so that means it uses 9mm poles. So this is the tent, a fairly compact package. I also have the optional ground sheet which makes it just a little bit bigger. So the best way to set it up is to see where the wind is coming from and put the pegs in that corner. So there are metal rings in the corners that you can use to put the pegs through, like this. And the next step is to insert the pole into the pole sleeve. When doing that, you want to make sure you go all the way to the end, like this, and then continue . So there's a pole holder cup in here, and you can use this to tighten it. You should tighten it all the way. And then the third step would be to put in the pegs through the rings. And because this is a tunnel tent, you just pull it and stake out the corners. Okay, so that's one side. Now let's do the other side. So one challenging thing about the Akto is finding the right angle for these guy lines. Often I think that I found the right angle, and then I do find myself adjusting it and readjusting it again. Right now this side seems okay, and this one as well actually. maybe adding a bit of tension on this side. So now only 2 pegs are left, and those are for these guy lines on the side to add stability to the tent. If there is no wind, you could see them as optional. One bonus tip is to always set up the tent with the door closed. This way you can see how much tension there already is on the door fabric and on the rest of the tent. As you can see here, there isn't enough tension here, so I'll need to readjust this guy line. So now let's have a closer look at the tent design. In here there are fiberglass poles that give the tent its shape, especially in the corners. As you can see, the corners are being pulled outwards. The guy lines are being used for that. These aren't the original guy lines that come with the tent. This is something I'm just experimenting with. The original guy line is slightly thicker. This is the original 3mm guy line. This is a 2mm Dyneema guy line. So this is a 3-part design. In here you have the poles to pull the tent outwards. This is used to pull this bit of the fabric, and this is the other corner. And they are connected. The guy lines are connected. It's just one guy line on this end and then one guy line on this end. And you can see as we pull on this, that affects this end. If we go even lower, here you can see the ventilation opening. From here you see the inner tent. There isn't really nothing underneath here. This fabric isn't waterproof, it is water repellent. So if you are in a hefty snowstorm, you can zip it up and this should keep you nice and dry inside. The corners also have some reflective fabric, so you can easily see your tent at night. This fabric is also placed on this hat and on the other side. So now we're taking a look at ventilation, and this is the hat that creates the shape of the ventilation. And there are 2 zippers in here, one in here and the other one is on this side. This piece of fabric is water repellent, but it's breathable. So that means even if the tent is fully zipped up, there's still some air coming in. So this is basically how you would want to keep the ventilation open at most times. If the weather is nice, you can roll it up even further and you can close it from the inside as well. So at 6'4" or 196 centimeters tall, I can just barely sit up, and I have to be exactly in this spot. If I move towards this end, there's less space. And over here, this is the spot with the maximum height. Again, there's no sleeping pad in here at this point. That's what gives me a bit of extra space. So now let's see how it looks like with a sleeping pad inside. This is a size large sleeping pad. This is 201 centimeters long by, I believe, 64 centimeters wide. So the reason I chose this Hilleberg tent is because this is the only one that actually gives you 220 centimeters length. Because as you can see, the tent doesn't get smaller the higher up you go, and that is the case with all other dome tents. So since the pad is 2 meters, there's still some space left in the corner. So this is with the sleeping pad pushed all the way to the end. I still have plenty of space for my feet. They are maybe touching the upper wall a little bit, but normally I would just push the sleeping pad a bit backwards, and that would solve that. Looking at this end, this is a fairly thick mattress. I also have a pillow in here, and the fabric isn't touching my face. It is fairly close though, I would say about 10 centimeters, so there isn't that much room left in here. So at first this might seem a little bit claustrophobic, but you do get used to it very quickly. At least I did. So now I'm actually absolutely fine with it. As you can see, my head is touching the fabric. Normally this isn't a problem when the tent isn't wet. This is fine. One time I've used this tent in -15, so there was obviously a lot of condensation, and that condensation turned into snow that was on the outer tent but also on the inner tent. So just by moving the inner tent as I was getting up, I had snow falling down on my face basically. So since I'm not able to sit up in this tent fully, when there's a sleeping pad in here, I would need to do everything lying down. However, as you can see, my head is still touching the inner tent. Even as I move towards the center, I would really need to move even further over here. And now my shoulders are in the middle of the tent, in the center of the tent. So only now my head isn't touching the inner tent. So now let's have a look at the inner door. The ventilation panel can be closed in 2 stages. This would be stage 1, and you can close it off fully as well, and that's just being done with some Velcro tabs. It would be nice if this panel was slightly bigger. The zipper is a 2-way zipper. That means you have 2 pulls. Which is great if you just want to grab something from the vestibule. You don't need to unzip the whole door. So the Akto is symmetrical. That means both ends have the same width, and it also means that potentially you could sleep with your head in that end, and some people do it. The only disadvantage is that the ventilation is on this side, so if you sleep with your head over there, you have potentially a bit less airflow. One advantage of sleeping with your head in the foot end essentially is that you can have a nicer view. You can look out of the vestibule, but if you close this inner tent, then you won't be able to see it anyway. Let me show you how that looks like. So now let's look at the tips to help you get the most out of your Akto. So you can see the door is rolled up, and the way it's done is there's an elastic band on here and there's a toggle that keeps the door up. What you can do is buy a little piece of shock cord, which is essentially just an elastic. And here I had two pieces that I tied together. And what you want to do is just to create two loops on both the ends. All right, so from there you want to attach it to this one. Pull one loop through the other like this. We zip down the tent. So because this is a 4-season tent, the fabric goes all the way down to the ground. To add a bit of ventilation, what you can do is just use this shock cord and essentially pull the fabric up just a little bit, and only this bit can add a lot of ventilation to your tent while keeping it protected from the rain. So tip number 2 would be to bring some extra guy line or some other piece of cordage with you in order to give you more flexibility with these attachment points over here. So if you're in a place where there's limited space and maybe some hard ground, just having a piece of extra guy line with you allows you to use your pegs in a slightly different place. So if we just attach the guy line to this metal loop, you see we can just move this peg into a different spot. And this will just give you that bit of extra flexibility. Just looking at the ground sheet, it can easily be detached. You can do it with just one hand. I often have it like this, rolled up just a little bit, so there's enough to keep my backpack dry, but I can put my boots over here, or if I need to cook, I would do that over here as well. So one design improvement that I think is a bit of the shame that Hilleberg hasn't done yet is having a zipper on the inner tent so that you can actually access this outer tent zipper from the inside. At this point, there is no way for you to readjust this from the inside. If we look at the Fjällräven Abisko 1 tent, which I think is inspired by the Akto, they have incorporated just a single zip on the inside that allows you to access this panel and this zipper here. So that would be just a nice to have, which I think would be a very easy fix. However, I always just leave this open, and never did I found myself wanting to close this in the middle of the night, to be fair. So one thing worth looking into when you first get the Akto is to inspect this spot right here, or rather to keep an eye on it, because you can't see anything from the outside. Some users have reported leakage coming from this stitching. Hilleberg says that it can easily be fixed by applying some seam sealer onto it, but at the same time it seems like this is a very old problem that hasn't been addressed properly by Hilleberg. Personally, I haven't experienced this issue, but then again, I haven't had this tent in a very strong rainfall, so I'm still keeping an eye on it. So one more thing that I want to look at is how much space there is in here when we detach the inner tents. So now with the inner tent removed, there's a lot more space on the inside. I can now fully sit up, still being in the center of the tent, of course, but there's just loads of space in here right now. If there are no bugs, you can just use this tent essentially as a tarp or just as a shelter. So on the one hand, this tent is very easy to pitch, and I'll try showing you how you can pitch this tent in just 1 minute. At the same time, I find it to be very sensitive to how even the ground is. For example, you can see that this pole, maybe the camera will show it, isn't entirely straight, and that's okay actually. But what happens if the ground isn't even? I find that that affects how taut the pitch is, and then I find myself constantly readjusting the guidelines at the ends to try and fix it. So what are the things you could do to make this tent even stronger? To begin with, a fairly easy fix. You could, as all Hillebergs, double pole this tent. Right now we only have one pole in here, but this cup and this sleeve allow 2 poles. What you could also do is use a 10mm pole from a black label tent. I've seen some users do that as well. There are options to attach additional guidelines over here. So right now we only have one going out to the side. If there's a lot of wind coming from different directions, having an additional guideline here would help a lot as well. Of course, there's this attachment point as well. I think this is also to ensure this doesn't compress, and there's always enough airflow in here. One thing the Akto doesn't have, but that's something you do find on other tunnel tents, is an attachment point for a peg on these ends of the tent. I've never found that to be an issue, but it's just something that I noticed. Okay, so here we have the Akto, and I will try to set it up in just 1 minute. Okay, all done. Okay, so I'm not sure how long that took. might have been more than just 1 minute, but the point I was trying to make is you'll spend the most time on getting the pegs in the ground in the right place when you're setting up the tent. What I did, obviously, I already had the pegs in place, and it was just a matter of spreading out the fabric, getting the pole in here and assembled, and then just attaching the guy lines to the pegs. So when would that be useful? For example, if you're camping somewhere and you're going to leave during the day, you want to return at night, this will make it so much easier for you to get your tent set up. Maybe it's a place where you don't want to leave your tents during the day. So again, it's just to demonstrate how manageable the fabric and this one pole structure is, and most of the work when setting up the tent is with the guy lines and getting the pegs in the right place. Okay, so what are my final thoughts on the Hilleberg Akto? To begin with, some pros. I think this is a very compact tent. It's fairly packable for being a Hilleberg. Hillebergs aren't made to be the smallest tents, they're made to be durable. And this tent, weighing only 1.7 kilo and fitting into that dry bag, allows you to go out even in bad weather, even in heavy winds, and still be sure that your tent will survive the night. So for a reasonable amount of weight, you're getting a very, very strong tent that you could use in 4 seasons. Personally, I very much like the single pole design. This allows you to set up the tent fairly quickly. It's also a fairly compact package, so not a lot of material, which makes it very manageable, especially if you're packing up the tent in the morning. With the Akto, I always feel like it's not a big tent and I can always just fold it nicely and get it into my pack fairly easily. Given the tent's shape, it will do fairly okay in the snow as well. Most of the snow will be able to just roll off the tent. However, if there's really a lot of snow, there can be some buildup over here, and this can compress on your feet and on your face. From the inside, you can sort of just kick the outer fabric to get the snow off the tent. One thing that I like to do is just use a spare pole section and put it right here in this ring. Right now it won't hold because I replaced the guy lines, but with the original guy lines there's enough friction in here to keep this pole in place, and with that you can help and support this structure over here. You could also use something else like a stick, but make sure it's not something that will break easily. Also, what I did is I bought a additional repair section, so I don't use the one that I actually might need to repair the pole. So that tip number 3 that I just gave you will not only protect you from the wind, but there were also some users complaining about the tents compressing because of high winds, and obviously that can happen because the poles are only in here in the corners, so this whole midsection isn't supported. Looking at the newer version of the Akto, the Enan, the Enan has one pole in the middle that prevents that from happening.